welcome. And James is the Director of Regional Relationships. First time at our meeting. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciative of being here. Thank you, everyone. My name is James Cagle. I'm the only 3 months in, Director of Regional Relationships for Waikakotahi, New Zealand Transport Agency, for West Coast, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, and for someone born and bred in Christchurch, I have to practice getting the West Coast first, but that is how we do it. So West Coast comes first on my chain of territories. I hope no one here holds it against me. I have just come off 5.5 years working for Fonterra. Prior to that, I did a reasonable tour of duty with Te Reno and Otahu. So I have some familiarity here, but I am getting back to grips with this side of the Alps, and I'm really pleased to be able to swap out the top of the south and get this part of the island back. Look, what I intend to do today is run through a presentation of two halves. I'm going to rattle through, hopefully at reasonable pace, some very high level, very large numbers in terms of the overall National Land Transport Plan. And then I'm going to turn to what that means in this part of the world, and with specific reference to the state highway network, because I understand you should have and you should be getting the local road side of things from your own staff. But if there are questions and things like that, particularly as I'm new, if I don't have the answer, I'm more than happy to take that, go away and come back and commit to getting you the right information. So with that said, hope all this works. What am I not pressing? Oh, it does now. Excellent. Okay, so COVID got in the way of our normal process, as it has, I'm sure, in plenty of processes, and so we've only really just recently launched the National Land Transport program for the next 3 years. We did delay it for a couple of months from the standard process this time around because of COVID. That created, I acknowledge, a great deal of consternation across local government because it got in the way in many respects for the consultation that you were trying to do in your long-term plans. And we do apologise for that. We were trying to be helpful and inadvertently became unhelpful along the way. This was also an extra rushed process because, as local government had been telling us, and we had been telling the rest of government, we are in an exceptionally funding constrained environment. There simply is not enough money in the National Land Transport system to do everything that everyone wants to do, even to the standard that we've been used to doing, and setting aside doing new stuff. And at the very last minute, and I'll come to the detail in a second, at the very last minute, ministers did recognise that the funding wasn't going to be enough and topped us up. That, though, did cause us to have to take the plans that we had, throw them out, add more and start and do more work. So that has created another process of churn and set of mistakes, and an inability at times for some councils for us to be able to tell you exactly what we have funded for you. So where there is a lack of clarity, we will continue to work with you to try to be clear. We've got an intention to be helpful, not unhelpful, but in getting more money for the overall system. It has been, at least for now, a little unhelpful. But look, the National Land Transport Program, a record amount of money being spent, recognising that is in the context of very substantial price inflation within the land transport sector. So the dollar today simply isn't going as far as the dollar did last year or in the last 3 years. Nonetheless, very large funding across the country. But I have to say this to an audience like this, in this part of the world, that doesn't shake down to a great deal of activity. There are some important projects here, but the vast bulk of the spend in land transport in New Zealand is concentrated in Auckland and Wellington. When you come to this island, the vast bulk of the spend is concentrated in Christchurch and Queenstown, and then Dunedin, and then everywhere else. And that's unfortunately how things have rolled out. And I'll get to why in a minute, because I think there are some things that local government can do. We can work with local government to start to voice the consequence of that. And here we are. So we are a Crown agency. we are required by law to give effect to government policy, and this is the government policy we are required to give effect to effectively. So the government policy statement on land transport sets how we allocate funding within the National Land Transport Program, and effectively it boils down to those 4 strategic priorities: safety, better transport, better travel options, improving freight connection, and climate change. If a program can stack up against those priorities when compared to other projects, then within some other constraints that I'll get to, you stand a good chance of getting funded. In this part of the world, it's true over here on the West Coast, it's true on the other side of the Alps too. A lot of projects, particularly resilience projects, my observation, have struggled to get high enough up the priority order when considered against those 4 criteria. And that poses a challenge that's fairly obvious, I'm sure, in this room. So look, significant investments in particularly urban environments and public transport, and trying to get people out of cars where there are the potential of building alternative options. Significant spend in walking and cycling across the country. A reasonable investment in state highways, but I've got to say the funding constraint that I'll talk about in terms of you is equally hitting Waka Kotahi in terms of how we manage and improve the state highway network. And you may or may not be able to spot the pin on my lapel, but substantial investment in safety, and that is set to continue in our years. And I'll talk about how that hits. So look, just diving into some of the details. So road maintenance was a very clear sore point as we got towards releasing the National Land Transport Program. When I talk about the funding constraint, that was most clear in the amount of money that was going to be available to local government in the form of local road maintenance, and the amount of money that was going to be available to us in terms of state highway maintenance. It simply wasn't enough to maintain existing levels of service, let alone lifting levels of service to where we think they ought to be from a safety perspective, and looking at the future. The additional money that we have secured from the Crown did allow us to increase the amount of money in terms of local road maintenance and state highway maintenance. I acknowledge probably not to the level that any local authority would like, but we believe the amount of money that has been allocated for local road maintenance should be enough to maintain existing levels of service. It's not enough, we acknowledge, to improve, where improvement might be justified on a sort of objective basis, but we shouldn't, over this 3-year cycle, see roads deteriorate further. So there's still a challenge to be solved, but we're not digging ourselves a bigger hole in the interim, which was the fear we faced when we gave you your indicative allocations earlier in the year. I touched briefly on safety. So you will see when I turn to how the funding is allocated, a column called Road to Zero. Road to Zero is the National Road Safety Strategy, looking for effectively a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries on the road by 2030. That is a substantial target. That is a very big lift, and it will require investment across a number of categories, not just in terms of how we deal with the road. It's a very big speed and infrastructure program, very big program on car safety, very big program on enforcement, working both with the New Zealand Police, but also seeing things like the transitioning of speed cameras from the police to Waka Kotahi so that we can manage it more effectively in terms of how we manage the road network. And you'll see in a second the funding allocated towards that. So when we take that government instruction for how to spend the money, we then effectively pour it through a 4-stage sieve. First of all, if something was approved but hasn't yet actually happened in the past period, of course that funding rolls through. Then you have your continuous programs, things like your road maintenance, road safety programs. They get funded to the level that we think we can sustain and we're instructed to. Then we look at the low cost, low risk projects, so the projects below $2 million. And then, if there's any money left over, we look at the new stuff. And I've got to say, in most categories, there isn't a lot of new stuff. There just simply isn't a lot of money left once you get down to that level. And it's because applying those 4 priorities, we then have to fund in these activity classes. So there are effectively 2 types of public transport funding: services and infrastructure, walking and cycling funding, local road improvement, local road maintenance, state highway improvement, state highway maintenance, road to zero, which is effectively safety, a little bit for investment management, and a little bit for rail, and a little bit for coastal shipping. These categories have grown substantially over the last few years. Coastal shipping's new, rail is relatively new. These are not things that we originally poured money from the National Land Transport Fund into in previous cycles. And the sources of money have not grown. So the money available to fund this principally comes from your road user charges and your fuel excise duty. There's a little bit there that comes from licensing fees, and that's largely it. You'll see the dotted lines in each of those columns. Those dotted lines represent the minimum amount that we were required to fund by the Crown this cycle. Once you take into account the things that are already approved in the minima, the truth is there's not much left over. And you can see for some of those, state highway improvements, public transport infrastructure, walking and cycling, local road improvements, the bar goes substantially higher, and that's the size of the bids we received. And the news we were looking at in the middle of August was that we were probably unlikely to fund any local low cost, low risk. You had already received very bad news from a maintenance perspective in terms of how much money you were going to be allocated to look after local road maintenance. We were looking at the same from ours, and we were looking at a very dire picture. Ministers understood and have allocated us an extra $2 billion of debt funding, so a loan against future revenue to top that up. And the picture looks a little brighter now. So the plan that we've released is a little brighter. You've had an increase in local road maintenance of about $1 million compared to what we said we'd allocate you earlier in the year to what we've been able to allocate you now. We've been able to fund low cost, low risk across the country to some degree, but nothing like what you've probably experienced in proportionate terms in previous cycles. And that's about the improvement we've been able to achieve. Fortunately, alongside the loan facility is a commitment from the Crown to review the funding of the National Land Transport System. So there is an acknowledgement from ministers that fuel excise duty and road user charges cannot, on their own, at the levels that they currently set, fund the National Land Transport System to do what we all want it to do. So over the next year to 2 years, depending on what day you catch the minister, there is a commitment from Cabinet to review that, and I would absolutely expect local government to be a strong voice with 2 ministers about what they need to see in a properly funded national land transport system, because no local authority I talk to thinks the current system is sustainable. And in a way, if we don't address the problem, the loan we've just been given will make it worse, because we'll have to pay that back at some form, and so reduce our future spending capacity. So what does that mean in Westland? It means there are a few key projects on the state highway network in Westland, but I've got to say on a national scale, not a lot. So you'll be aware, I hope, of the work around France. We're committed to be a part of that, clearly, and to work with the rest of government and what the rest of that looks like as the township is planned, and we work out how to move forward there. There are some really key resilience projects on State Highway 6 further south. There's very strong rockfall problems that we need to get on top of, and so we'll work through those. There is a really important set of studies on the Lewis and Arthur's Pass in terms of how we manage to keep those open, or likely to keep those open if the Alpine fault goes. So those need to be progressed in the next 3 years. There are some low cost, low risk projects important for the localities, but no one can pretend that they are huge for the Aotearoa River and for Douglas Creek. Hopefully, things like improving the size of the culvert should mean that the road doesn't wash out when you have significant rain events. Maintenance. Oh, yeah, no, by all means.
Where's Douglas Creek?
Douglas Creek is, look, I confess I had to look. it's further south past France. As the state highway turns inland. So in terms of road maintenance, now these figures, the 149 kilometres is west coast only figure. So of the summer reseal program, which is about just under 150 lane kilometres of chip seal, 60 of those kilometres will be in this district, and there's a little bit of asphalting, and most of that is here. Some drainage renewals and some fairly useful structure maintenance. But it is trying simply, really, and I can't pretend otherwise, to maintain the asset that we have now. This isn't about getting the asset better. There are some important projects that sit alongside the standard project, and they've been bundled into what gets called the New Zealand Uptrade program, which, writ large, like Jobs for Nature, was a COVID response package. And these 5 bridge upgrades, guardrail upgrades, upgrades to parts of the bridges have been staggered so that they can hit the market in a way that doesn't swamp the market and tries to sustain the investment. So I understand the last 3, the 2 on the working south, the 3 to the south are yet really to hit, the bottom 2 are yet to hit the market. They should hit the market soon, and the middle one has started. Fabrication is occurring off-site, and main works you should see over this summer. Loads of emergency works. As emergencies occur, that pulls from the funding pool, but it doesn't take funding away from your projects. It comes from the main maintenance pool. So all I've got to say is my experience of the last 3 months is we are seeing a vast increase in extreme weather events and a very serious uptick in the maintenance consequences of that. We just have to prepare for more of the same. Questions?
Oh, now's your chance, guys.
Dive in.
Okay. Council Davis.
Yeah. What you're sort of saying is that you've there's money there to maintain what we've got, and you've asked government for money to improve it, and government has said no.
Government has said, if I can put words in their mouth, government has said, we'll think about how. So at the moment, what happens is we get whatever money the system produces. So how much fuel is used, how much kilometres are driven through diesel, right? That gives you a set amount of money. Yeah. We figured that'd be 13-point-something billion in this cycle. And you look at how much you can do with that and you go, this isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And so we go to government and say, look, the automatic funding isn't going to give it to us. Can you help? And they go, we'll give you a loan and we'll think about how to fix the system. And so that thinking about how to fix the system is yet to occur. One way, and I'm not for a second committing because I can't do it,
sure.
to it. One way to fix the system, you could simply say, and you recall government chose not to do this part because of COVID, you could simply increase fuel excise duty, fuel tax. That would pour automatically more money into the system. Government has to think about whether that's something it wants to do. So it's not our, we don't have that power. So we simply receive the amount of money that comes through the system. So they haven't said no, they've just said we need to think about how to do that. One thought that is out there, for example, is there is clearly going to be more spending designed effectively to reduce carbon emissions. You know, if you invest substantially in a passenger transport system in Auckland, for example, that gets people out of their cars, walking, cycling, or catching a train, that reduces carbon emissions, and there may be bonds you can issue that will pay for that, because there are investors who are interested in doing that. That would relieve pressure on the system where the dollar that otherwise could be spent somewhere else. Right? So that increases your total, that increases your sources of revenue. So government has to think about that. And my point to you is simply that that is a conversation that local government will want to be involved in.
Can I ask you a question on the revenue issue? At the present time, electric vehicles aren't contributing to road use charges.
Correct.
The numbers of those,
Correct.
of course, is increasing. Why are they not contributing, and why are they not paying road use charges to contribute to the cost of the roads they drive on?
So ministers announced very recently in the last couple of months that they would continue with the current policy that electric vehicles would be exempt from road user charges in order to incentivise the uptake of electric vehicles. But you are absolutely right, it comes with a trade-off. Electric vehicles are out there on the road using the land transport system that they are not paying for. When there's, so we're all subsidising, but then at the moment through the current funding system, we're all subsidising the amount of money that gets spent on coastal shipping. Road users are paying for that. That extra column that was added onto the side of that graph, that they don't pay, ships don't pay road user charges, they don't pay fuel excise duty. So there are a number of those sorts of things in the system that are either implicitly or explicitly acknowledged. Now, ministers have explicitly acknowledged that, decided to continue it, but in giving us the loan, at the same time said, yep, okay, we recognise the system isn't working. We need to think about how to fix it. But yeah, you're absolutely right to point that out.
No,
sorry.
Councillor Neil.
Yes, so nothing being proposed really for walking and cycling other than.
So walking and cycling is an interesting one. We received twice as many nationally. We received twice as many bids on a dollar value basis than we had money allocated. So we have a minimum amount we are required to spend by the Crown. We also have a maximum in each of those category classes. The maximum didn't matter when we didn't have the loan because we were only going to go anywhere near the minimum on all of it. We basically tapped out. For walking and cycling, we have funded to the maximum, and that level of funding is still only half what everyone across the country, councils across the country asked for. So there is a really strong demand to spend more on walking and cycling, and currently our hands are tied behind our back.
But none of that has been spent in Westland.
No, I don't know about low cost, low risk. I honestly don't. Your officers will have low cost, low risk answers, and if there's a particular project that they're not clear on, I can go and find out for you. But so under $2 million projects will all be low cost, low risk. And so there may be low cost, low risk, but no projects that are over $2 million in value. But yeah, no.
Yeah, and the other question was, and I've got it before, just around Knights Point down south, something going into that area, which is potentially.
I will take a note and find out. I do not want to put you wrong.
This is a very vulnerable.
No,
part.
And come back to. There are a very long list of vulnerable points in the South Island in particular that we acknowledge we need to get to work on to make the case for the investment, because we haven't, you know, and that case isn't getting through the current funding system well enough. Knights Point, I'll take it up.
Thank you. What kind of speed camera van are you going to use so that I know?
I can't tell you that. No. That would be cheating.
Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. In terms of the NZTA's contract management. I read a report not that long ago that the five largest infrastructure projects were had something like $2 billion in overrun. I mean, look at the transmission gully. What are Transit doing to rein that in?
Thinking very hard about how to do it differently is the short answer, is the glib answer. I don't mean to be glib because it really does matter because it takes money out of other projects. But Transmission Gully, for example, was a particular project construction that was, choose my words very carefully, packaged for us and handed to us by government. I think there is a general acknowledgement that no one wants to do that kind of project that way again. And you'll see if you pay attention to the news, the issues there are ongoing. But no, you're absolutely right. Look, project management and cost control within projects is exceptionally important. It is going to be critical across this next 3-year period, whether your project is tiny or enormous. I referred to the cost escalations. This is a very highly, we say tensioned, highly tensioned program, where, take walking and cycling, for example, there is a lot of demand, and if projects can't get ahead or get in as they were envisaged and sized, we will drop them in favour of other projects. So we have to maintain control on costs. We cannot let costs go up by 20% across this 3-year period and hope to be anywhere near like delivering what we plan to deliver. So
that's cool. And the other question I've got is this push to rid yourselves of the special purpose roads. Now, we have one in Westland, the Haas to Jacksons Bay Road, and it's the worst road we've got in the district. What have you got on that?
So I can tell you how much how much money has been allocated to it. I know there is substantial maintenance money allocated for that special purpose road. I can't comment on the policy decision to rid ourselves of special purpose roads per se. I'm aware of it, but all I can say is we need to work with you to make sure that that transition occurs properly and that the level of service for road users is maintained the way it needs to be. Right? I mean, it's not a conspiracy to dump the roads and walk away. It's designed to simply try to get out of having these bespoke arrangements. That's all. So we need to make sure that we handle that transition correctly. But I know there is $2.6 million allocated to Westland District for special purpose roads for improvement in this district. So that'll be for that road. And so those are low cost, low risk projects. And then there is $3 million allocated, which was what was requested, as I understand it, for maintenance on that road. So
in 3 years.
In 3 years.
Righto. Sweet.
Councillor Hartshaw.
Oh, firstly, thanks for coming along today. Just a couple of questions, I suppose. And yeah, the electric cars are going to be a problem, aren't they, for creating funding for New Zealand roads? But
unless we find a policy solution, absolutely, we absolutely know. But honestly, we saw that coming 15 years ago. We just had chosen successive governments have chosen not to act.
Just one thing about the Waiho River. Before we lost the bridge, we had about 4 or 5 spurs on the north side above the bridge. And every flood, we get a big flood, and every flood washes the ends off it, and then they cut some more rock in, and the rock goes in the bottom. I just wondered if there was any chance of reviewing what they do there. Like after the bridge was rebuilt, they put a constant wall up for probably half the distance that the rock is, and it just remains perfect the whole time through, flood after flood. But when you look at it there now, we've got 2 or 3 spurs and all the ends of them are back down in the river. and all that rock's laying in below the bridge, and it slowly builds a river up, which doesn't really help with the height under the bridge. Is it, do you think that will ever change? Like, how many rivers in New Zealand have got constant flow stop banks compared to where we are here?
I can think of a number on the other side, but nonetheless, look, I don't know the answer, but I'm happy to go and find out for
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of money gets poured into it, and
you. I know, I get it. Particularly if you've seen another way of doing it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Francois.
Kia ora, James. Great to see you again, mate. Thanks for the presentation. I don't have any issues with it. It's good to have you here presenting it in one. There is just a question. I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer it, but it's just around the consenting when it comes to this road stuff. I'm assuming, does that sit purely with the contractor, or do you have any influence in that space?
No, it should be. If it's state highway, it should be us.
Okay. No, that's good to know. Okay, no
problem. Tell me.
Yeah, I will. This is about global consenting. That's all. Thanks, mate.
Yep.
Councillor Mann.
Kia ora, James. Thanks for the report. I guess you're just the messenger for a lot of what's being told. So I appreciate and understand that. I think it's really concerning that the infrastructure in this country is crumbling and we haven't got the funds. However, we're wasting funds on lots of fluffy projects nationally. So to me, this is core function of the government, and to be under-investing in roads and infrastructure like this is a huge mistake, and I think it will bite us in the long run. I think some things that have been touched on already, sort of the epitaph point, this slip down in Knights Point has been captured. So thanks, Councillor Neil, that was on my list. Also maintenance, ongoing maintenance of our roads and the infrastructure that accompanies the roads corridors, like Waka Kotahi's signage in Westland is particularly bad. We have a high rainfall and it gets covered in lichen, moss, mold, and there's very little done to keep them clean and to keep them visible. And I understand when budget constraints are there, it's not about making them, we haven't got a lot of money in the coffers for cosmetic work. It's actually making them functional too. So I wish I was in Hokitika and I could take you for a tour around to show you some of the signs I mean, but in general, unless they're brand new, the signage, Waka Kotahi signage, is pretty poor in our district in terms of the maintenance and upkeep of it. So there's a general comment. I think also notice that and it's a really grey area, because in Westland, a lot of our towns have the state highway as their thoroughfare or their main road, and it's different because a lot of towns don't have that as the artery that runs through all of our townships. And so on there's things like Waka Kotahi owned roundabouts and town entrance signs, gardens and the like, and that is an ongoing issue with our council in terms of who's actually responsible for maintaining those assets and who will actually write out the check to get the work done. A classic is the roundabout in Kamara Junction. It's in a really bad state of disrepair. There's so many issues around that. The Hokitika main entrance roundabout, no one seems to take any responsibility for that. And on it goes throughout the township. The entrance to it, to Hokitika, the 80K zone, is pretty bad and is not maintained. The only maintenance that happens there is the work that I believe our contractors do on instruction from council. So there's a number of things that sit sort of, even though you're here talking the strategic, there's actually a lot of things in the operational area that I think need addressing because they concern our ratepayers, and it's not council's role to do work on the state highway corridor. So I've just put that out as a theme as well, that there needs to be a better way of us, or having some sort of system that residents can capture those sorts of concerns and have them clearly put through to Waka Kotahi and for them to be actioned.
Look, councillor, thank you. I couldn't agree more, and we ought to be telling you when we are. You know, so look, I've taken a list of the ones you've mentioned. If you've got others, I'm more than happy to take them.
I'm sure we could, between us and our transport team, we could get you a list.
And you know, I mean, ultimately that will be a question for our contractors, but it's our contract. We need to manage that, and we need to manage it in a way that works with your community. And you're absolutely right to point out the difference between towns that have effectively their main street or a main arterial, which is the state highway, which is managed by us, versus ones that don't. You've lost a lot of autonomy simply by having that. Now, there's a reason that the state highway's there, but we have to manage it the way that works for you. So I'm more than happy to come back on, at the very least, to understand what the levels of service we're managing those to are, you know, what the standards are, whether we're meeting them or not, and work from there. So I'm happy to do that.
That's excellent. And I think my final comment is around the number of one-way bridges. I think that's a serious issue in the future that we need to start addressing as modes of transport are changing, and those roads were not designed for some of the vehicles that are on them now. And the bridging network and the age of the bridging network is going to be a real issue, particularly for South Western in the future. So there's kind of a bouquet in the sense that, yes, I really appreciate you coming. That's really good to talk to you, James, and to hear from you from Waka Kotahi. But I think there's also a long list of please help us with these critical matters, and not waste the money on a Skypath in Auckland when we could have a 1/100th of that, and it would fix a lot of our region's infrastructure issues. So thank you.
Councillor Hart.
Oh, thanks, James. Clearly there's an issue with funding, so that needs to be sorted. But Councillor Martin talked about the one-way bridges, and that was one of my questions as well, especially around the main bridge between the Bearley Bridge between east and west. I drive it quite often, and I just think some of those bridges need seriously looked at. But
so look, you mentioning the Bearley is it's worth just pausing a second. I totally understand why the one-way bridge network is a pain point. Strictly speaking, any change to that is what we call an improvement rather than maintenance, right? And I talked about how improvements are difficult to fund. There will absolutely be safety issues and concerns and questions around some of them, great. The Bearley, though, I think falls into a completely different category. That's a resilience question, you know, and the ability to maintain that route there. So, as I mentioned, we are doing a study on that part of the network. I'm sure, I'll go to check, but I'm absolutely sure that it will include the Bearley. It also will include the viaduct. The last thing you need is the fold going and the viaduct standing, but both connections to the viaduct going. So it's just sitting, you know. So we need to think about how that will work so that we can then make the case for funding. If we don't do the study, we'll never get the funding. So we have to start. So
okay, thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Kia ora, James. Just interesting sitting there going, oh yeah. And why I do that is because when we very first started as the newly elected council back in our 12th of December 2019 meeting, we actually, one of the main topics that we talked about is how do we get on top of the roading infrastructure and lobby central government for more extensive funding. And here we are nearly 2 years later, still having the same conversation. I'm heartened by the conversation from you and the fact that you see the reality of the situation, especially in small regions like ours. We did, and I cannot remember who came along from Waka Kotahi, right? And originally, and that was very disheartening, that conversation, I have to say. I went away from that feeling absolutely gutted, because at that point, and I'm hoping someone from council can pull out those meeting notes, we at that point addressed 11 high-risk areas on the coast, including Knights Point, that were of a huge concern to us, and raised all of them, but were pretty much told that there was no funding to really get on to really any of it. Now, that was 2 years ago. So I would really like to see if we can go back and find, I know we talked about it considerably at the time, what those 11 high-risk areas were.
That'd be really useful.
Yep. But yeah, so it's more encouraging to hear you in your new role, making the right noises to lobby better for regions like ourselves. The other thing, though, that I will stress, and Councillor Martin touched on it as well, is our state highway maintenance is appalling. I'm sorry, there's the boom, you know, once upon a time you could drive down our state highways, it was all regularly mowed. I would only suggest to you when you're driving, if you're driving out of town today, to take a look at our signs, at the white posts. We had a discussion on this maybe 12 months ago going, well, will we go and clean them? Because they're filthy. But apparently it's just, you know, under NZTA, it's their responsibility. Well, NZTA aren't doing it. And yeah, so, and it still brings me back to, you know, the unfortunate reality that, you know, this funding, every time there's an increase in funding, you know, Auckland's getting some new motorway put in, or there's something going on, you know, down in Wellington, it's always the bigger centres, and there's hardly ever any focus on the smaller regions like ourselves. However, when I say we're a smaller region, if you look at the length and distance of our region and compare that, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, the distance of like Wellington to
605 kilometres.
605 kilometres. You know, so the money's going into these bigger centres in the North Island for length distance of roads up there, but not over here. So yeah, I think you know, like, it would be great now that you are in this role, that we could make a point of maybe some updates coming through regularly from yourself on where we're at, and you know, maybe a presentation again in another 6 months, because this is, you know, I mean, I've sat here now and we're nearly 2 years down the track in our term, and nothing's happened at all.
So just slightly build on the comment I made about maintenance, because I'm happy to follow up the issues. What I will be doing is I will be checking effectively what our current contract requires. You know, are the contractors delivering what they're supposed to? Because that's a key question. If they're not, fine, we'll go and fix it. If they are, doesn't mean the problem isn't real, just means we're not funded for it. And that's what I mean when I said about maintenance. We've got enough money to maintain the levels of service, not to get them to where we think they need to be. And there are absolutely parts of the country, maybe it's here, where we know we want the level of service to be better. We simply don't have enough money for it. That's true on the local roading network, as it's true on the state highway network. It'll be a frustrating answer to get to you, but at least then we've got clarity about which kind of problem it is, and whether it's a we need more money problem, or whether it's we need to hold our contractors to account problem.
To be fair, some of the stuff should be pretty standard.
No, absolutely. Some of the problems you're raising
Mowing
really are
side of the roads and planning the signs.
Take your point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, James. That's great. That's from me.
Kia ora, James. Good to see you back in these parts with a different porto. The looking through this, it's it's pretty skinny, isn't it? As to how much NZTA is spending on tie posting. Not a lot. In fact, I don't know if I've seen such a small capital works program forward to what we're looking at now. It's been pared back to bugger all.
Yeah, so the reality on state highways is the money, the vast bulk of money for state highway improvement is eaten up by very large state highway projects that are occurring that way. And until they end and finish and, you know, they wash out of the system, there isn't much money to go around elsewhere. It's the truth of it.
Yes, unfortunately,
Sorry.
it's ruled by politics. Unfortunately. But, and so looking at the specifics here with the YO bridge, you know, I mean, that's really, you know, it's not talking about a replacement of the YO bridge, which is that's the place we should be at. You know, as part of the forward, the master planning for Friends Township and that the council's now talking about, this should be all part of it. And the NZTA should be sitting there as a partner talking about planning for the future for a bridge that's not just a patch-up job, which is what we've had since, we haven't had a permanent bridge over the YO River since the suspension bridge was taken down about 30 years ago. And ever since, she's been a patch-up job. And you know, this is still just continuing to patch up.
In 3 months, I'm getting reasonably familiar with the conversations around bridge replacement. All of the conversations on the same in Ashburton and elsewhere as well. I'm happy to try and find out exactly what process is going, because you're right, Kotahi ought to be around the table. Whether we're able to actually solve problems is a different issue, but we ought to be there. So.
And the single lane bridges, but the only solution to that is not about widening them or replacing them. There's not even a program for them. It's just about putting guardrails on. Again, you know, it's just a plaster. And the Tartree clip on for the cycleway. I think, do I understand that's the one that's coming off the Terranakau Bridge?
I don't know.
Is that one? Yeah, yes, it's been recycled.
Repurposed.
Yeah. But again, that should be part of the discussion with the council, sitting down around the table with NZTA about the long-term future of that bridge, because master planning is talking about moving the township towards the north, which is the Tartree River, and a single lane bridge won't cut it in the future. And, you know, so we should be talking about replacement of that bridge, not just with another patch-up job with a recycled or repurposed cycleway, but a two-lane bridge fitting for the new township of France. You know, it should all be, I'm not saying in the next 5 years, but I mean, it should certainly be on the horizon. But I don't see it anywhere. I mean, this is all new to you. I mean, you're new on the job. But anyway, there's lots, and the other one, as Councillor Neil said, is epitaph cutting is a huge worry.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest we're not doing anything there. I just didn't want to give the wrong detail of what we're doing here. It's on our list. I just want to come back with the specifics of what we propose there. Okay, so I will come back. I'll fire it up through.
Yeah, the best advice there would be to go for a drive and pull your car over to the side of the road. Don't go too close to the side of the road.
Yeah, I've been warned.
And stand at a safe distance to look down over it, and then you can see what the issue is, and have a better understanding of what we're talking about.
Yep.
Anyway, kia ora.
Thanks.
So once Transmission Gully is finished, we're all going to be in clover, are we, James?
No, I didn't say that.
But are there any projects of that scale in the pipeline that are going to soak up such a big proportion of the budget?
without pretending that my answer is comprehensive, it entirely depends how government looks at funding a large passenger transport projects in the large centres. So you'll be aware. I mean, there are still huge ambitions in Auckland. You'll see reporting today, I think, very large expensive options in Wellington, and I'm involved in projects looking at the future of transport in Christchurch, which are by no means cheap. How they are funded is part of resolving that question about how the whole transport system.
So this is a real long-term problem we've got.
This is not
We're a small remote district, and we're going to be at the bottom of the queue at long term.
So yes, but in two respects, and they interrelate, but they're not the same. One is simply the quantum of funding in the system. You know, how much money is there to spend, and therefore how far down the list can you go? So is Fed and Ruck enough, or are they set, or are there other ways? And then the other question is, and what do you spend it on? How do you prioritise it? That's those four priorities. What I've heard so far from South Island councils is that resilience isn't nearly high enough or clearly articulated enough in that mix. In the next government policy statement is issued, this was already said, there's always a new one coming, but he's already said the current one doesn't do enough for climate change, for example, and resilience definitely has a relationship with climate change, although not exclusively. South Island Council very clear that resilience isn't high enough up. So even if you didn't change the funding question, if the priorities were different, certain projects would jump higher anyway and may get that limited pool of funding. So there's a dynamic relationship between the two. They're not the same thing.
Well, James, very interesting. I've just got a couple of small things. The whole thing comes down to funding. I've raised it several times. The people who pay the money for the road are the road users.
Correct.
And political decisions are made to take that money and put it into electric cars, cycleways, coastal shipping, without any cash flow coming from those areas. So you're in a declining situation for road maintenance. That's actually where the issue is, in my opinion. If coastal shipping is going to require X amount out of your budget, it's a political decision. It should be funded by government. Same with cycleways, same with electric cars, and that way the maintenance on our roads and our replacement bridges will work.